I never trusted coincidences. A man who spent years analyzing data, tracking patterns, and predicting human behavior doesn't just stumble onto things. He sees the signs long before they become a problem. I should have seen this coming. The first red flag was her phone, always flipped over, always on silent. Eden had never been secretive before. She didn't need to be. Our marriage had been built on routine, efficiency. We weren't the couple who lingered over dinner or sent sweet messages during the day. We were a well-run operation, predictable, stable, until she changed the rules. It was a Tuesday night when the proof landed in my lap. I'd come home late from a client meeting in the city, tossed my keys on the kitchen counter, and found her laptop open on the couch. She never left it unattended. I glanced at the screen. An email draft, half-written. The subject line, "I can't stop thinking about you." I sat down slowly, my pulse steady, clicking through the inbox. Messages buried under receipts and work reminders. The words were there in black and white, clear as a classified report. She was seeing someone. A name came up more than once, Ryan. It took me less than 5 minutes to track down who he was. A quick search through our bank statements showed a series of payments to a motorcycle training course 6 months ago. That's where she met him. I closed the laptop, took off my glasses, rubbed my temple. No anger, no sadness, just facts. Eden walked in a few minutes later, carrying a laundry basket, looking at me like she always did, expecting nothing out of the ordinary. "Didn't hear you come in," she said. I watched her for a moment. The soft way she tucked her hair behind her ear. The slight hesitation in her step when she saw her laptop closed. "How was work?" she asked, setting the basket down. "Productive," I said. "Learned some interesting things." She didn't ask what. Didn't pry. She never did. That was our dynamic. Unspoken agreements, quiet compromises. But now I knew. And now, she'd feel what it was like to be watched. I let it sit for a few days. I wasn't the kind of man to make a scene, to lash out in some emotional fit. No, I preferred methodical action. The way I saw it, she had been making decisions for months behind my back. Now it was my turn. I went to my office the next morning and pulled up every tool at my disposal. I wasn't just a security consultant. I was a strategist and analyst. The kind of man people hired to assess vulnerabilities, predict threats. I ran a full assessment on my own wife. Her routine was flawless. 2 days a week, a yoga class after work. Except she wasn't at yoga. The GPS logs from our shared car app showed she was driving to a bar on the outskirts of town, staying for 2, sometimes 3 hours. The security cameras in the parking lot, easily accessible through a backdoor connection, showed her car, and then his. Ryan Underwood. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to see it in person. That Friday, I followed her. Left my office early, took my truck instead of my usual sedan. Drove 2 cars behind her all the way to a dimly lit bar just off the highway. The kind of place where men in leather jackets and women with bad decisions clung to each other over cheap beer and loud music. I parked across the lot, adjusted my glasses, and watched. She walked in first. 5 minutes later, he followed. Taller than I expected. Muscular, tattooed, the kind of confidence that came from never thinking past tomorrow. They took a booth near the back. She leaned in close when she talked. He smirked like he'd already won. I sat there for a long time, watching, listening through a discreet audio pickup. I didn't expect remorse. I didn't get it. "Wish we could have more time," she said. He chuckled. "What's stopping you?" She sighed, tracing a circle on the table with her finger. "It's not that easy." I could have laughed. Not that easy. She was sitting in front of a man who had no obligations, no responsibilities beyond whatever thrill he was chasing that week. Meanwhile, she had a husband who had built a life with her, a home, a future. Not that easy. Right. I waited until they were finishing their drinks. Then, I got out of my truck and walked inside. The bar smelled like spilled whiskey and desperation. I moved through the crowd, taking my time, until I was standing right at their table. Eden looked up first. Her face drained of color so fast I thought she might pass out. Ryan leaned back, unaffected, giving me a slow once-over. "Can we help you, man?" I looked at Eden. "You should have picked someone smarter." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I turned my attention to Ryan, adjusting my cuffs. "You think this is just some casual game? A thrill?" I let the silence stretch, watching the first flicker of doubt cross his face. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Eden reached for my hand. I pulled back. "It's over. I said, my voice low, controlled. Pack your things when you get home. We'll handle this cleanly. You've made your choice. I stepped away before she could speak, before Red could puff his chest and say something stupid. Outside, the night air was cool, steady. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I was in control. And I wasn't finished yet. I drove home without turning on the radio, without checking my phone. Just the hum of the engine, the steady grip of the wheel, the weight of the moment pressing down. I wasn't replaying the conversation. I didn't need to. It had gone exactly as expected. Eden hadn't begged, hadn't defended herself. She had just sat there, caught, exposed, the reality of her choices sinking in. Ryan, on the other hand, had been exactly what I thought he'd be. All confidence when he thought he had the upper hand, but quiet when faced with something he couldn't control. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark. Eden hadn't beaten me home. I unlocked the front door, stepped inside, and turned on the kitchen light. The place felt different now, emptier, though nothing had changed. The same table, the same chairs, the same photos on the wall. A decade of routine, shattered in one evening. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring at the spot where we'd sat every morning, sipping coffee, pretending everything was normal. I wondered how long she'd been faking it, how long she'd been lying with a straight face. That's what got me, not the cheating itself, not even the betrayal, but the deception. The calculated way she had continued living a life she had already abandoned. I heard the garage door an hour later. Her car rolled in, the engine cut, then silence. A long pause before the side door opened, and she stepped inside. She hesitated when she saw me standing there, keys still in her hand. You came straight home, I said, voice even. She swallowed hard, set her purse on the counter. Where else would I go? I raised an eyebrow but didn't answer. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. She shifted on her feet, like she wasn't sure if she should sit or stay standing. You meant it, she said after a long moment. I don't say things I don't mean. She exhaled sharply, ran a hand through her hair. So that's it. You tell me. She bit her lip, looking away. I never wanted to hurt you, Nathaniel. That almost made me laugh. I set my glass down, folded my arms. That's supposed to mean something? She looked at me then, really looked at me, searching for something. Maybe a sign that I'd break, that I'd argue, that I'd fight for this. But she wouldn't find it. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Good, I said. Means you're finally being honest. She flinched. I pushed off the counter and walked toward the hallway. Pack a bag. Take the guest room tonight. We'll talk in the morning. She hesitated again, like she wanted to say something else, but I didn't give her the chance. I left her standing there and shut the bedroom door behind me. I didn't sleep much. I didn't expect to. I lay there in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the house, the occasional creak of the floorboards as Eden moved around. I wasn't grieving. I was recalibrating. The way I saw it, this wasn't the end of my life. It was a shift in circumstances, a problem to be solved. By morning, I had a plan. I got up early, dressed like it was any other day. Sharp suit, clean shave, the uniform of a man in control. When I walked into the kitchen, Eden was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. She looked up when I entered, wary. I sat across from her. Here's how this is going to work, I said. We keep this clean. No public drama, no mess. She set her cup down, nodding slowly. I don't want to fight, Nathaniel. Then don't start one. She blinked, caught off guard by the coldness in my tone. I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a document, and slid it across the table. Preliminary separation agreement. My lawyer has the full draft ready, but I want you to look at it first. She stared at the papers like they might burn her. You had this prepared already? I moved fast. She swallowed hard, then nodded. And what if I don't agree? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. Then you make this difficult. And trust me, Eden, you don't want to see what that looks like. She looked down, rubbing her temple. I never wanted it to end like this. Funny. You sure worked hard to get here. She winced, but didn't argue. She knew better. I stood, grabbed my coffee, and headed for the door. I'll be home late, I said. I suggest you start packing. I didn't wait for a response. Outside, the morning was crisp, the sun just breaking over the rooftops. I got in my car, pulled out of the driveway, and didn't look back. I had a long day ahead, and this was just the beginning. The drive to the office was routine. It gave me time to think, to analyze. I didn't dwell on Eden. She was already a part of the past, and I had no intention of revisiting it. What mattered now was execution. I'd spent years in intelligence, years working through layered problems, anticipating outcomes. This wasn't just about a failed marriage. This was about strategy, consequences, and control. I arrived at the office early, before anyone else, and spent the next hour pulling together the next phase of my plan. First, I reached out to a few trusted sources from my past. Men I knew who weren't afraid of bending a few rules when it came to gathering information. Ryan Underwood wasn't as clean as he liked to appear. It didn't take long to find out that he had some loose ends of his own, debts, minor fraud, and a spotty business license for his tattoo shop. I smiled to myself. A few phone calls, and I could have his whole world flipped upside down. The pieces were falling into place. By mid-morning, I had everything I needed. I drafted a few emails, made some calls, and set things in motion. I wasn't going to confront Red directly, not yet. That would be too easy. No, I needed leverage. I needed something that would break him, make him vulnerable, and I needed to do it without lifting a finger. That's where my real expertise lay, putting pressure on the right places, making people crack under weight they didn't even know they were carrying. When the clock hit noon, I knew it was time. I called Eden's office. Her assistant picked up on the first ring. "Hi, is Eden available?" "She's in a meeting right now. Can I take a message?" "No, that's fine. I'll catch her later." I hung up and leaned back in my chair. She'd be working late, just like always. That gave me the perfect window to set things in motion. The first call I made was to Hunter Daniels, a man I knew from way back, polished, ambitious, and hungry for power. He'd always been the type to see opportunity in any situation, no matter how dirty it got. And now, I was giving him just that. "Hunter," I said when he picked up, "I need a favor." "What's going on, Nathaniel?" His voice was smooth, like he was already measuring his next move. "You ever hear of Ryan Underwood?" I asked. "Yeah, the tattoo guy." "Right. Turns out he's not as clean as he pretends to be. There's some leverage to be had if you're interested." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of paper shuffling. "You need me to dig into him?" "No, I just need you to make a call. Nothing too fancy. Just enough to put him in a tight spot." Hunter chuckled, a low sound that didn't reach his eyes. "I can do that. How much do you want me to push?" "As far as it'll go. Just make sure he doesn't see it coming." "Done," Hunter said with finality. "You'll get your results soon enough." I hung up and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The first part was in motion. The next piece fell into place at the bar that night. I had my sources, the ones who watched the places where people didn't want to be seen. A discreet word here, a casual exchange there, and before long, I had the information I needed. Red's shop was operating on borrowed time. The inspection was scheduled for the following week. That would be enough to rattle him, bring in the authorities, tie up his business in red tape, and leave him with no way out. By Thursday, Eden was getting nervous. She could feel the pressure, and I knew she would. She wasn't stupid. She knew I wasn't a man who backed down from a fight. I made a point to keep the conversation short when I saw her that evening. I didn't need to make her feel guilty. That wasn't the point. She already felt the weight of what was coming. She met me in the kitchen, her eyes avoiding mine. "Nathaniel, can we talk about this?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I set my briefcase down, took off my jacket, and hung it up. "About what?" I asked. "You know what I mean." Her voice was softer now, a hint of desperation creeping through the cracks. I opened the fridge, took out a bottle of water, and drank slowly, thinking, "There's nothing to talk about." She took a step closer, then hesitated. "Please don't do this." I put the bottle down and looked at her, my expression unreadable. "You made your choice. Now you'll live with the consequences." I could see the conflict in her eyes, the guilt, the fear. But I didn't have time for that. I was already 2 steps ahead. "Don't think you can fix this by apologizing," I said. "It's done, and you'll see that soon enough." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there. I didn't need to wait for her response. The game was already in motion, and there was no going back for any of us. Later that night, I met with my lawyer to finalize the separation agreement. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. I needed to make sure that when the dust settled, I would be standing tall, and everyone else would be left picking up the pieces. The final play was closing in. I spent the weekend putting everything into place. My lawyer had the final version of the separation papers ready, and I'd set up the meeting for Monday morning. There was no hesitation in the plan now. Everything was as tight as I could make it. Eden had no idea what was coming, and Red was too wrapped up in his own mess to realize his time was running out. I'd given him just enough rope, but he didn't know he was already swinging from it. On Monday, I showed up at the office early. I had a few things to finish before the meeting. By the time Eden would be arriving, I'd already done my part. Red's shop was scheduled for inspection that afternoon. I'd made sure of that. One last check to ensure that the authorities would be breathing down his neck the moment they showed up. I called in a favor from an old contact in local law enforcement, made sure the timing was perfect. He'd get a visit, and it wouldn't be a simple inspection. No, it'd be a raid. By noon, I was in my office when Eden called. She hadn't been expecting it, not at this hour. Her voice was tight, forced. "Nathaniel, we need to talk." I didn't flinch. "You've had enough time to talk. This isn't a negotiation." "I know what you're doing," she said, barely able to get the words out. "And I don't want to drag this out anymore." "You've already dragged it out long enough," I replied. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about consequences." There was a silence on the other end, then a shaky breath. "Where are you? I need to see you in person." I glanced at the clock. "I'm busy, Eden. I've got things in motion. This is over. You can't just—" She stopped herself, taking a moment before continuing. "Please. I'm begging you." "No," I said firmly. "You don't get to beg now." I ended the call before she could say anything more. It wasn't my problem anymore. The clock ticked by slowly. I had a few more calls to make. I needed to ensure that everything was lined up for the meeting later. The lawyers were ready, as was the evidence. All that was left was the final confrontation, and that was going to be quick and clean. At 3 in the afternoon, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The inspection was underway. Red's shop was under scrutiny, and he was there, watching his world start to unravel. The authorities had found his records, falsified licenses, unpaid taxes, debts he'd hidden behind false names. It was enough to bring his entire operation to a halt. I didn't waste any time. I called Eden's office again, and this time, her assistant told me she was at the lawyer's office. I could already guess what was happening. She wasn't making this easy. She probably thought she could manipulate her way out of it, or at least buy herself some time. I left my office and headed to the law firm. It was time to move on this. The meeting was scheduled for 5 o'clock. I walked in at exactly 4:55 p.m., not a minute before or after. I didn't need to be early or late. I needed to be precise. Eden was already there, sitting in the conference room with her lawyer, a woman I recognized from a few business dealings. They both looked up when I walked in. "Nathaniel," Eden said, her voice low. "I think we need to." "Sit down," I said, cutting her off before she could finish. I took my seat at the table, looking directly at her lawyer. "We're here to finalize the separation." I slid the final document across the table to them. "I trust everything is in order." The lawyer glanced at Eden before nodding. "Yes, everything is in order. However, we need to discuss." "I'm not here to discuss anything," I interrupted. "I'm here to close this chapter." Eden shifted in her seat, uncomfortable. She wasn't used to me being like this, cold, calculated. She probably thought she could talk her way out of it. But she'd been wrong. She had no leverage anymore. "You should have thought about this before," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "Before you thought you could have it all, without facing the consequences." She stared at me, her face pale. "You're really doing this?" "I'm not doing anything. You did this. You made the choice. Now you get to deal with it." I turned back to the lawyer. "Please, let's get this over with." The lawyer nodded, but I could see she was uncomfortable. This wasn't how she wanted to do business, but she had no choice. She signed the papers, passed them back to me, and waited for Eden to follow suit. Eden hesitated, but there was no escape for her now. She signed. I didn't say another word. I took the papers and stood up. "Have a nice life," I said, then turned and walked out. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, I knew it was done. There was no going back now. I'd outplayed them both, and they didn't even see it coming. Red's world would crumble. Eden would be left with the ruins of her choices, and I would move forward, unscathed, in control, and ready for whatever came next. The fallout came quickly, just as I'd planned. By the time I woke up the next morning, the calls had started coming in. Word spread fast in a small town, and a mess like this was bound to attract attention. Eden's parents had already reached out, offering to talk. They probably thought they could smooth things over with a few words, convince me to play the fool. I ignored their calls, but I knew they would come looking for her soon enough. I spent the day at the office, handling the usual business, client meetings, strategic reviews, and making sure my reputation remained intact. That was the priority now. There would be no distraction, no second guessing. The reality of my personal life wasn't a concern anymore. What mattered was controlling the narrative, and so far, I was winning. Eden showed up at the office around 4, looking more disheveled than I'd seen her in years. Her eyes were red, tired. I didn't know if it was the lack of sleep or the weight of the reality crashing down on her. She stood at the door, hesitant. She'd always been good at pretending things were fine, at keeping up appearances. But now, I could see the cracks. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't look up from my desk. "I'm not discussing anything with you, Eden." She took a few slow steps toward me, then stopped. "I need your help." "Help?" I asked, setting the pen down slowly and finally meeting her gaze. "You had your chance for help when you made your decisions. This isn't my problem anymore." Her hands clenched at her sides. "I don't know where to go. Not my issue." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. "You've got family, friends. Figure it out." She stood there for a moment, like she wanted to argue or plead, but she didn't. She knew better than to try and manipulate me now. She had no ground to stand on. I need some time," she said, her voice breaking slightly. I shook my head. "Time is something you lost when you decided to live a double life. Now, you deal with the consequences." I stood up, walking past her toward the door. I didn't even give her a chance to say anything else. This was over. When I got home that evening, I found a letter waiting for me on the kitchen counter. Eden's handwriting was slanted and hurried, but I didn't need to read it. I already knew what it would say: apologies, pleas for forgiveness, maybe even a promise to make things right. I didn't open it. Instead, I walked outside, called a local realtor, and began looking at potential properties to invest in. The place I had now was too tied to the past, too much history I wasn't interested in holding on to. It was time to move forward. I had the deal finalized by the end of the week. A new property, a small business in the area I could use for expansion. Something that would keep me busy and focused on the future. The real shock came when I got the call from Eden's parents. They wanted to meet. I agreed, knowing full well it wouldn't be for a calm discussion. They didn't want her to be alone. They wanted to mediate, some kind of peace between us. But there was no peace to be had. I wasn't going to go back to playing the part of the forgiving husband. I met them at a small cafe in town, a place where I'd been a few times for casual meetings. They were already seated when I walked in, looking uncomfortable, but their faces lit up when they saw me. "Nathaniel, it's good to see you," her father said, though the words felt forced. "We've been trying to reach out to Eden, but she's—" "Shut up," I said, taking a seat across from them. Her father blinked, his face going red. Her mother sat back, quiet, watching me carefully. "I'm not here for apologies," I continued. "I don't care what you want from me. Eden made her choices. Now, she deals with the fallout. And I'm not going to clean up the mess." Her father tried again. "But she's our daughter, Nathaniel. She's struggling. We're asking for your understanding. You've got your daughter's number, her phone. You don't need my understanding. She needs to face reality." I paused, meeting their eyes. "You both do." There was a long silence. Her father looked like he might argue, but he didn't. He was a man who didn't understand how things could fall apart this quickly, but he was learning. Her mother, on the other hand, seemed to realize that her daughter's actions were as much her responsibility as anyone else's. Finally, I stood up. "Don't waste your time," I said. "She's already moved on. You should too." I walked out without waiting for their response. There was no point in dragging this out. Back at home, I finalized the details for the new property. The paperwork would be done the next day. My future was moving forward. Eden's was fading into the background, and she was no longer part of my plans. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. I'd kept mine, and that's what mattered. The past was sealed, and now the future was mine to shape. The next few months passed without much disruption. I focused on my business, making the necessary adjustments to ensure the new property would be a profitable venture. Eden's absence was more noticeable at first, but it didn't take long before the routine of my life settled back into place. I moved forward without hesitation, knowing full well that there was no looking back. The past had been swept away, and the future was being built, brick by brick, just the way I liked it. Eden called once more, just before Christmas. It was late, after 10 p.m., and the ring of my phone was the only interruption in the silence of my office. I stared at it for a moment, weighing whether to pick up or let it go to voicemail. In the end, I answered. "Nathaniel." Her voice was quiet, unsure. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. I didn't let the silence drag. It's too late for that, Eden. I know, she said, a sigh slipping through the line. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. Your realization came a little too late, I replied, no emotion in my voice. And I'm not interested in revisiting the past. There was a long pause on the other end. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said finally, the words heavy with something I didn't care to decode. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. I don't need your apologies, I said flatly. It won't change anything. I didn't mean to hurt you, she added, but I could already tell the sincerity wasn't there. She was trying to make peace, to find some kind of closure, but she wasn't offering anything of value. I'm fine, I said, cutting her off. You've made your choices. Now, you live with them. Good night, Eden. I hung up before she could respond, a weight lifting from my chest as I ended the call. There would be no reconciliation, no moving backwards. The chapter was closed, locked, and there was no reason to revisit it. The following day, I finalized the deal on the property. It was smaller than the house I'd had with Eden, but it was mine, and that was all that mattered now. It was a fresh start, a chance to build something that belonged to me and me alone. The kind of legacy I could control. I kept the process methodical, like everything else in my life. No room for mistakes. No room for distractions. I also took on a new partner. Wendy Martin, a sharp businesswoman with a no-nonsense attitude, had been on my radar for a while. We met at a business event, and I'd seen the way she handled herself in high-stress situations. Her strategic thinking matched mine, and after a few meetings, we decided to join forces. Our partnership was pragmatic, nothing more. We both had our own goals, and we recognized the value in working together to achieve them. There was no room for personal feelings, just mutual respect. She was as focused as I was, and that's what made her valuable. I wasn't lonely, but I wasn't exactly looking for anything else. The business kept me busy, and the legacy I was building for my children was taking shape. They were the ones I was focused on now. They were the ones who would benefit from everything I was doing, everything I'd worked for. The foundation I was laying down was for them. One afternoon, a few months later, I ran into Hector, my brother. It had been a while, and honestly, I hadn't been eager to reconnect. Our relationship had always been strained, and there hadn't been much to say in recent years. But I didn't mind the silence anymore. We met at a bar in town, one of those dark, quiet places where no one asks too many questions. He was sitting at the bar when I walked in, and he didn't look surprised to see me. There was no awkwardness between us, just a familiarity that had survived all the years of distance. Nathan, he said, nodding toward the seat next to him. Didn't think I'd see you around here. Just needed a drink, I said, sliding onto the stool next to him. He ordered a beer and then fell quiet for a few moments. I could tell he was trying to figure out what to say, but there was no point in small talk. Have you been? He asked finally. Good, I replied, keeping my answer short. Busy. I heard about the divorce, he said, his tone neutral. Tough break. I didn't look at him when I responded. It was the right move. He took a long pull from his beer, clearly unsure how to approach the topic. You always were good at keeping your head down. Doesn't surprise me that you've moved on. I glanced at him then, meeting his eyes. That's what you've always thought of me, isn't it? Too cold, too controlled. He didn't flinch. I never said it was a bad thing. But you've been alone a long time, Nathan. You can't keep people at arm's length forever. I let the words sit in the air between us. He was right, but it wasn't something I wanted to admit. Not now. Not to him. I don't need anyone else, I said, the words feeling final. I've got everything I need. Hector raised an eyebrow, as if waiting for me to elaborate. But I didn't. I didn't owe him any explanation. He'd never understood the way I worked. He still didn't. We sat there for a while longer, both of us lost in our thoughts. When I left, I didn't feel any different. There was no epiphany, no change in how I saw him or myself. It was just another night, another step forward. Later that week, I sat in my new office, staring at the plans for the business expansion. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about leaving something solid behind, something I could be proud of. Eden's mistakes, her absence, they didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was the legacy I was building. The new office was everything I needed. Clean, sharp, and far from the distractions of the past. It was the kind of place I could come into every day, focus on the future, and never look back. The business was growing. I had the resources, the people, and the plan. Everything was falling into place exactly how I'd expected it to. Eden had tried reaching out a few more times, but I ignored every call. I didn't need to hear her apologies anymore. They were empty. Her attempts to make peace were as hollow as the life she'd left behind. I'd already made peace with the fact that I would never have the family I once thought I'd have. And that was fine. I had control now. Everything I was building was for my children. They were the legacy. They would benefit from the decisions I'd made, from the life I'd forged. I got a call from the bank a week later, finalizing the details on the new property. The old house was officially sold, the papers signed, and I could already feel the weight lifting. There was no going back to that place. It didn't feel like a loss, though. More like shedding a skin, moving on to something better, something that belonged to me. I stood by the window of my new office, looking out over the city. The future stretched out in front of me, clean and open, and I knew I'd built it. Not just from business deals or strategies, but from the lessons I'd learned through the hard knocks of life. The betrayal, the losses, the mistakes, those had forged something stronger in me. They had sharpened my vision, solidified my resolve. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The phone rang again. This time, I picked it up. Nathaniel, the voice on the other end, was calm, professional. It was Hunter Daniels, the guy who'd helped me clean up some of the mess that came with the fallout. Daniels, I said, leaning back in my chair. I've got the last bit of info you wanted, he said without wasting time. Underwood shops under new ownership. The city's been eyeing a redevelopment project in that area for a while now. But I'll tell you this, that little raid? It's already cost him more than he can recover from. His name's getting dragged through the mud, and there's talk of some legal consequences. It's over for him. I smirked. That was the plan. You push, you wait, and then you make sure they don't come back. You did good, I said, and for once, I meant it. Hunter had his own game to play, but he knew where his interests aligned with mine. I always do, he replied. I hung up and let out a breath. The pieces were all where they needed to be. Eden had moved on to whatever chaos she was creating now, and Ryan, was nothing more than a shadow of the man he once was. I'd played the game exactly how it should have been played. I'd walked away unscathed, leaving nothing behind but the consequences of their actions. I'd learned a lot in the last few months. Some lessons came at a high price. Others, you learned simply by doing. But in the end, control was the only thing that mattered. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making sure they never had a chance to do it again. When I walked out of the office that day, I didn't think about what I'd lost. I thought about what I had now. The business was thriving. My kids had their future secured, and I was exactly where I needed to be. The past was done. The future was here, and it was mine for the taking. There was nothing left to prove. I had everything under control, and that was exactly how I wanted it.